I know. I think I gave that one back. Okay, hello. All right, looks like there's a couple of people here. I am going to wait a second for everybody to get in. I would like to make this video just troubleshooting 3D printing issues. And if we have some time at the end, maybe we will go over assembly issues or calibration, that sort of thing. But I'd like to make sure that everybody can print their parts before we get on to assembling things. Thank you. Lori Brooks says, nice hat. It's my Papa Smurf hat. It's kind of cold in here by the window, but this is where the Wi-Fi is good. Okay. I just entered this chat. Lori Brooks says, hi, Austin. What part did you have trouble with? Maybe I missed a message. Austin, you having some trouble printing a part? Or no? No questions. Drink some coffee. JPad asks, could you tell why you're using the high temperatures you set? Sure. So I'll just get to these questions chronologically, I guess. I generally print PLA at about 220, maybe even 225 degrees Celsius. I don't have like a laser infrared thermometer, so I'm not 100% trusting that that is the actual temperature of my extruded nozzle, but that's pretty much across all of my machines, whether I'm using Enders or ANETs or even a Pressa. That's around the temperature that I'm setting. I just find that things extrude a little bit smoother and bond better at higher temperatures. Of course, if you get way too high, it'll start to burn and you'll get schmutz in your nozzle, it'll clog, you might heat up the cold end too. You can print colder, certainly if you're printing something with a lot of like bridged overhangs. So if you have two pieces here and no support material in the middle, and you're printing a line between them, a colder temperature will give you less drooping, but pretty much whenever I can, I print around 220. You may have different filament, or your printer might register a different temperature from its actual temperature. And so I would encourage you, this is not like the quick answer that everybody wants, but I would encourage you to play around, print a couple of things, maybe print a Benchy, maybe print one of the Brancopan's more complex parts at a couple different temperatures for each of the new filaments that you get in, and then sort of see where you can maximize detail and minimize drooping and use that temperature. But I think 220 is a good place to start for PLA. Much hotter for PETG, and I really hate printing in ABS, but we won't get into that unless we have some specific questions. Okay, JPad, I hope that JPad also says it seems that it's at the top end of the filament range. Yeah, so generally they recommend that you print like 190 or 195 up to maybe 210, 220. Again, I don't know if I'm actually printing at 220 or I need to set my printers all to 220 to get 190. That seems like way off, even for a little thermistor like that. I think I'm actually printing hotter than most people. I have a bunch of friends who also 3D print some things, and pretty much all of them agree with me. Around 220 to 230 is where they're printing PLA. Okay, what else do we have? Sounds like Austin might have some assembly problems. Doesn't seem like there's too many people in this chat. So Austin, if you have a assembly problem, go ahead and I will get to it when I'm done answering 3D printing problems. Okay, abear4991 says, on the part B5, the little piece that hangs out always curls upward, and I have printed it twice now. Any advice? Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up part B5 on my other laptop so we know what we're talking about. I should have had this pulled up first. see. I don't like Windows. Okay, B5 is the top body plate. It says the little piece that hangs out always curls upward. What little piece hangs out? What are we talking about here, abear4991? Can you text me? Are we talking about the piece on the external part of the piece that then mates to the side of the camera body, or are we talking about this little? There's like a nub that hooks around on the inside of the latch release lever, or are we talking about something else? Hey Bear, while I'm waiting for your answer, I'll just give some general tips for curling prints. I generally like to print on a piece of glass, a big thick piece of glass that can't be pulled or distorted by the piece warping while you're printing it. If you're having a lot of problems, I might try printing with a brim, internal and external brims, which will increase your trimming time, but help stick things to the bed. It's like a little lip of plastic that is printed around the bottom edge of the print to help it stick to the bed. The other thing you can do is just clean the bed really well with hot soapy water. Make sure it's dry, and then you can probably get the best adhesion with a super clean glass bed with no anything on it. And then it says outer hook piece. It's about mid-part triangle shape-ish. Okay, yeah, so that piece should be supported. Let me just take a look here. Yeah. Oh, no, that piece should not be supported. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the piece upside down. Yeah, I know. I see what part you're talking about. I should have figured out some screen share thing here so we can all look at it. But it's a little hooked triangular piece on the inside of B5, which is in the body pieces folder. Yeah, so first thing I would try doing is clean your bed, make sure it's like a nice mirror finish, right? You can print directly onto that bed, just clean and dry without any spray. I think that'll give you the best, tightest bond. And then maybe add a brim, and then make sure that your first layer, here, I'm gonna make a little drawing. If you were to cut a cross-sectional area of your first layer, let's say, okay. Okay, so if this is your bed here, right, and that's flat, your first layer lines should not be sitting on top of it like this, nor should they be smushed perfectly flat like this. You want something like a semicircle. And you can actually just start printing a square or something and then manually click the steppers over by turning the vertical Z-axis screws until you see with your eye like really close in a bright light. I like to use a headlamp sometimes when I'm working on printers until you're getting this cross section, and that should give you really good bed adhesion. This will give you all sorts of problems because you're too close and this first layer is extruding everywhere. It'll look bumpy and lumpy on the sides, and that's no good. If it's coming out super smooth and curling up, this is probably what you have. This is what you want. So anyway, I hope that helps a little bit. If you still can't get it to print smoothly, contact me directly. We will figure it out. Okay, let me just read some more of these questions. Laura Brooks says her sweet spot is 110 degrees for PLA. I think she probably means 210, and 60 degrees is probably the bed she's referring to. I think that's, pretty reasonable, depending upon, again, your printer, your filament. Hey, Derek Konigsberg, I hope I'm saying that right. If you're having bed adhesion problems, common with large flat parts, yes. I strongly recommend getting a tube of Magigoo. Derek, what is that? I have not heard of it. I have tried a lot of different things, from tape to glue sticks to hairspray. I really like Aquanet. I bought a can for $1.70 at Walmart about 2 years ago, and it's just finishing up now, and I run 10 printers all the time. You really don't need too much of it. I feel like when the bed is a little bit dirty, you can increase adhesion by spraying it, but also, make a micro layer of things between the bed and the part that you can then, chop off with a knife and it'll peel up. Yeah, I would say, yep, Laurie Brooks says, oops, 210. Yep, that makes sense. I would say that, yeah, if you really, really want it to stick, just clean the bed extremely well. Make sure it's nice and smooth, and don't use any adhesive. The PLA should bond to glass pretty well. Okay. Abear4991 says, just clean the bed with alcohol. I would just use soapy water, but alcohol works. I keep gallons of rubbing alcohol in my shop for cleaning glass and resin printed parts all the time. So yeah, alcohol should work too, but warm soapy water also is good. If you have like a paint scraper or some sort of very sharp, heavy knife, you can scrape really bonded pieces of plastic off first. Try not to scratch the glass. Magigoo sticks when hot and releases when the bed cools. Works wonderfully on PLA on my glass bed. Huh, okay. I will check that out. I'm going to order some on Amazon, maybe. CM Sim says, what's your email address to contact you directly? You can always send me an email at ethan@cameradactyl.com. It takes me a little bit to get back to people. I generally do it in bits and spurts every couple of days. But yeah, send me an email. I'm not that famous. JPad says, some of the gears with different part numbers look the same. When printing in a group, do I have to note which gear number is which, or are they interchangeable? None of the gears are interchangeable. They're all a little different. In particular, there's some gears with, like in the frame counter, there's one gear that has 20 teeth and one gear that has 21 teeth, although one of them is attached to a shaft, so it's pretty clear. Yeah, a lot of them will look the same, particularly if they're not scaled. They're all using sort of involute teeth pattern, so they, are similar shapes, not mathematically similar, but visually similar shapes. Yeah, keep note of which ones you are printing. When you go to do assembly, it should be pretty clear in the video which piece is which. They won't fit in the wrong spot. And if you just match them up to the video, it should be fine. I do not keep note of which piece is which as they come off the print bed going into assembly. It might take you a few more minutes to figure out which piece is which as you're assembling them. But, by the time you make the camera, you're going to have assembled it and disassembled it about 45 times. So by then, you don't have to worry about the part numbers, I should think. Yeah. Do we have any other questions? JPad, does that make sense? I hope it does. How do you tell? Okay, Abear says, how do you tell the difference between C4 and C5? Let me just look those up. Oh, okay. C4 and C5 are exactly the same. Yeah, doesn't matter on those. sorry, I misspoke earlier. Those should be the only ones now that I'm thinking of it. Those are both sprocket wheels that follow the film as it goes through the film gate. Okay. Looks like I've done a good job in 15 minutes answering everybody's questions. We're going to have 900 million Brancopans printed by next week. I think Lori Brooks is probably the first one to have finished her build and posted some photos this morning. It's really nice to see. Somebody made one in gold that I really liked. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what everybody makes. Oh, JPad says, wait. Okay, Lori Brooks has a question about the take-up spool. JPad, you let me know your question. I'm going to answer Lori Brooks's question about the take-up spool. Go ahead. Or I'll answer whatever question comes. Both of you fire. I will just answer whichever one comes in first. Make this a super exciting YouTube video. Okay, Derek beat you guys both to the punch. The cold shoe slot on B7, the cold shoe plate, is a bit too narrow to fit things, but the cold shoe slot on B1, the main body, fits fine. Is this a quirk of our printer tolerances, or is it expected? So I believe those are mathematically the same in the model. You may have a couple things might be going on. Neither of them are a big deal. So the first thing that might be going on is if you have a stretched belt in the X or Y direction and you print one of the cold shoes, let's say, this way, and the other cold shoe this way, one might be stretched and a little bit larger in this direction, the other might be larger in this direction. And so that can lead to differences. And maybe I should measure the model and make sure that I'm not speaking falsehoods here. But I think they're modeled based on, I subtracted the same shoe foot for both of those things. They're definitely printed in different orientations on the print bed. The little cold shoe plate, which is, I think B7 is printed vertically on the bed. And the other one should be, they're printed in the same orientation now that I'm thinking about it as I do it. Yeah, I don't know. So what I generally do whenever I have any hot shoes on any of these cameras is I take the end of an X-Acto knife and just trim the inner ridges so that a shoe can fit in nice and smooth. And then, a little bit of sandpaper as needed. You want a nice snug fit. These don't have any sort of like little leaf springs inside of the shoe, like on a metal camera, to keep things tight. And so generally I will just sand or file or just trim with a X-Acto until things can fit in nice and smooth. And then I'll use just a tiny piece of gaffer's tape on the bottom of the shoe. So it's like something just a little bit squishy so that you can get a snug fit but still get things in and out. Derek, let me know if that makes sense. JPad says, did you use a 0.35 line width for speed in printing? I started with M1 and didn't like the results. I've been using 0.16 since. Sorry, what is M1? Are we talking about S1, the supported print profile JPad, or are we talking about something else? I just don't know what you mean by M1. In general, though, I think I can answer that question. Yeah, I'm printing at 0.35 for a couple of reasons. One, it's much faster than printing at 0.16. The other reason is maybe counterintuitively, I think larger line widths often lead to stronger parts. I don't think it matters in the case of the Brancopan. If you've all printed a bunch of them, you know that like it might not be stronger than an Icon F, but it's certainly more durable. It's just a big chunk of plastic. So however you print it, so long as your layer adhesion is good, it should be, the strongest part. Oh, M1 is the mount M1. However you print it, the camera body is going to be the strongest part of the camera, right? If you drop it, you're going to break a lens before the camera. And so I don't see a reason to print with thicker lines for more strength there. If you wanted even more strength, you could add more shell layers or more infill if you wanted to carry around a heavier camera. That's probably not necessary. Yeah, I mean, you'll definitely get a better finish and a more precise part at 0.16. I think the final sliced version at 0.35 Z height per layer. It was taking me like 35, 36 hours to print. I had done some other ones initially when I estimated the time cost of the camera to be 75 hours instead of 100, and I was getting it down to like a 26-hour print. But yeah, I think generally when I can get away with it, 0.35 is, I think, the optimal line height for a 0.4 millimeter nozzle with 1.75 millimeter diameter filament. But yeah, I mean, by all means, if you're just printing one of these things and you got plenty of time, try printing it at a finer resolution. I think you will get better results. Also, if you're going to give up speed for quality, you might really reduce the speed of your outer shells in the print speeds section of your print profile. You know, printing slowly gives you way less backlash and much smoother results, less ringing or other artifacts from the print process. So if you want a beautiful one, sure, turn your layer heights down, maybe even use a smaller nozzle, which will really, really slow things down, and slow down your speeds. Okay, so Lori Brooks. Oh, is there a trick to getting the film to catch? I'm thinking about making a mod of the take-up spool to put a little hook in it to catch the sprocket hole in the film, or is there a trick to loading? So there is a trick to loading. I originally had this problem on my prototype, and I had it on my list of things to do is to add a sprocket catch. There's a little bit of manufacturing annoyances with tight tolerances to make that work reliably in everybody's print. But in using this thing for months, I found a trick that never once failed me over a little bit more than 100 rolls and is actually very easy, which is okay, so when you load the film, there's no catch in this lever, in this take-up spool here. Let's see if you can see it. There's just a slot. And so what I like to do is I stick the leader of the film through the slot, and then I put my finger, my thumb, to hold the film against the reel, and then I just wind until the other end, the end of the leader that protrudes through the other side of the take-up spool is then wrapped under the rest of the film. And once that happens, if you keep it tight by keeping a finger on here, it'll never release, right? It's always got some back pressure from these sprockets, and yeah, it just sort of clamps down on itself. You might want to make a mod if that really bothers you, but I've found that it's pretty, like, I've never had the problem where the film releases and you just are winding nothing. And you can also watch, you know, the counter and this guy and their movement to make sure that the film is moving as you're going. But yeah, I would just recommend play around with it, but keep your thumb here when you wind your canister over and put it into this side. Make sure that the sprockets are seated through the film and that you have a nice tight piece of film when you close the door, and you should be good. Okay. Let me make sure that I have this JPEG question. Oh yeah, he started with M1. Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good place to start. It's a nice circular part. You should be able to tell if everything is aligned from that part. Okay, JPad's asking me a question that is not 3D printer related, but since there's only 9 of us, I'm going to answer it anyway. Do you process and print or scan your own film from the Brancopan? Could you talk about that sometime? Sure. I do process my own film. Sometimes I send some things out to Picture Perfect Film Lab here in Albuquerque. I pretty much do all of my black and white either at home or at the local makerspace, which is QLab downtown. It's a great place. Yeah, I process it as normal. I really like stainless steel reels. The plastic walk-in loader type reels drive me absolutely crazy. You know, I have very strong feelings about it, but that's really a personal thing. If you can have walk-in loaders not jam on you, great. But I would suggest some stainless steel reels that'll work forever. I've been thinking about 3D printing some plastic reels that work on the same principle as the stainless steel reels, where you cup the film and turn rather than walk it in from the outside. Now we're sort of a little off topic. Generally, I do some scanning with I have like an Epson Perfection 4980, I think, 49 something, 48 something. It's the predecessor to the like V500 and 700 series scanners. It's okay. I think I would prefer scanning with my A7. I have a nice Nikon macro bellows rig that I use on my A7 for copying or scanning, 35 millimeter film. This is a little too wide, so maybe I'll have to make like a film gate. But I have a whole long project once I start on that for using a laser to find the edges of film so that you can use an Arduino to advance the film one frame and then trigger the camera through the cable release port and then advance the frame and use it like a Paycon. But yeah, I mean, that's building that is maybe a simple project. That's kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie, and I know I will be 6 months down that rabbit hole by the time I'm done with it. But anyway, flatbed scanner is cool if you have some sort of negative holder, like maybe for medium format film that will show the whole frame. DSLR scanning is fine. I don't really do too much darkroom printing these days. I have an enlarger in my darkroom. But yeah, I spend a lot more time making cameras than actually using them sometimes. But yes, I would like to make some darkroom prints soon, show you guys. But I bet somebody else will make some beautiful darkroom prints before I do. I've also been developing some color film with like one of those immersion circulator type of machines, except mine is an Arduino and a tea boiling, what do you say, resistor or whatever. But that's another product for another day. Okay. Okay, most of my prints have been coming out okay, but there's a lot of stringing. It hasn't affected the quality of any of the parts. It's just annoying to clean. Any advice to reduce? Yes, A-Bear, the first thing you should do to reduce is decrease the temperature of your print. Stringing happens, so one, in the print settings, you can make sure that the extruder is retracting when it moves but doesn't extrude. There's one enable Z-hop, which actually removes the nozzle. So like if you're printing a part over here and then you go to print a part over here and you have to cross perimeter, Z-hop takes the whole nozzle, picks it up, moves it like this, and then drops it back down. And then there's also retraction, which means that if you have the filament inside the nozzle, it's a cross section, right? And you're extruding, and then you go to make a move where you're not extruding. Instead of stopping extruding, it'll actually pull the filament back up, move, and then push it back down. Both of those things might help reduce stringing, but like the number one issue is that if you have, extruded so much plastic here, and then you go to move, even though there's no plastic sticking out of the tip, it gets hot and it starts to become less and less viscous and just drips out of the nozzle. So yeah, the first thing I would try is like dial it back by 5 or 10 degrees, print the same thing, see if that is a problem. You're probably too hot for the filament that you are using. The other sort of unfortunate part about this is no two filaments are the same, even from the same company. And so I find certain like brands and colors in particular have less stringing, and some, plastics just don't have the same thermal properties, and they like to just ooze and string. Okay, let's see. Derek Konigsberg says the rewind knob R1 isn't specified as a color part. Is it best to print this in black, or is there something okay to print in color? Yeah, so I think that for sure is good in black. Let me see if I have some of these parts. I got a box of Brancopan parts. I don't have a rewind knob in here. Okay, so the way this piece works, if I can pop out the support. Okay. In here, you have on the inside, I don't know if you guys can see, there's a little flange there. And the name of the game with interlocking parts in a film camera is just to make sure that they interlock in a way such that light cannot go in, right? So you never want a straight hole through anything. You want, like, you know, a path where light has to go around, which it can't really do if it's, you know, on black parts like this. And so, see, I'm blocking my own view. There's a lip on, this is the rewind fork, if you will, and this comes up from the bottom in this hole. I just thought about how to hold these, right? So this goes up through here like that. And so that bottom lip should take care of any stray light issues. I think you probably could print this in a color, but I mean, certainly the bottom of the rewind knob sits on this face here. And for me, I prefer this to be black because it's just adding another level of protection. That being said, I would give it an 80% chance that you'd be fine with almost any color, even maybe even glow in the dark that makes its own light. That this bottom light trap here should take care of everything, but I have not tried it in color, and so you may find some light leaks if you do print it in color. I think more likely than not that is appropriate to be printed in color. I only labeled the pieces with the color suffix that I knew were okay to print in color. There may well be other pieces that you could print in color that wouldn't make a difference. For example, the sprocket gears, right? Like, let's see, these little guys, right, that touch the film, like those could be, I don't know, another color to help you see them. I don't really see the need for it, but you know, there are pieces in there that you could probably print in another color that would be fine, but you're going to have to do a little bit more experimenting. It takes me a week to make one of these dang cameras, and there's a lot of permutations of different colors. And one other thing to bear in mind is that some colors are more opaque than others. Some are really translucent, and even like the same color from the same manufacturer, often you can get a more translucent version of one. I would highly recommend that you use the most opaque and least translucent of parts on your cameras. But yeah, I mean, try it out. Let me know how it works. Certain Exposure says, YouTube superstar. Thanks. I got dressed up for you guys. Oh, John is here. Yay, QLab. Hey, thanks, John. John's our president at QLab. He's a wonderful guy. Certain Exposure says he just bought an Ender 3 direct from Creality. That's great. I wonder what they're going for these days. Last I checked, they were $175 with free shipping, which is a great deal. Also, I saw that you can buy an ANET for $90 now on YouTube, not on YouTube, on eBay, which is an amazing printer for $90. But for $175, you will save yourself 2 days worth of headaches getting it to print straight. The Ender is a really nice machine. Lori Brooks says, after having to deal with the dark bag unloading a hacked together 220 back, I literally squealed with delight when I was able to rewind my film and unload it in the daylight. Thanks. Yeah, so that's actually what led to this whole project. Is my buddy wanted a panoramic camera, and I just kept trying to sell him on the idea of shipping him a free homunculus, and he would just buy a bunch of 220 backs. And we did a bunch of experiments, and we could use the little 3D printed either Facmatic or home designed adapters to use a 35 millimeter can in the feed side, but it works in like a Pentax 6.7 or like a Texas, like a big Fuji camera, but in a Hasselblad or a Mamiya or something where the film comes like out and around and back, using an empty can and adapters just always led to jamming. I could not get that to work. And so that was sort of like the birth of this camera, was entirely just the rewind mechanism. So you guys enjoyed that. Certain Exposures asks, Lori, did you develop your first Panda Pan roll already? I think she did. I saw some pictures this morning, but I'll let her answer that. Nico Cazal says, hi, Ethan. Sorry to come back with the same question, but did you decide on a platform to allow the community to share their Q&As during the journey? Maybe that's actually a good thing we can talk about here. I have been thinking about this, and Nico has been asking me about this, as have some other people, since like day one. Do not apologize. It's a really reasonable question. So the things that I've been thinking about is, one, like starting a Facebook group. I'm not going to manage a Discord group. I don't know if you guys are really into that. Or the other thing I was thinking about is just using the Homemade Camera Podcast Facebook group as a place to talk. What I don't know is how many people are going to want to talk about issues they're having building and using the Brancopan, or share their stuff. If there's like 800 people who are really, working on it all the time, maybe it makes sense to split it off into its own separate group. For now, I think what I'd like to do is just use the Homemade Camera Podcast Facebook group. I think, I've seen pictures of maybe 10 or 15 builds. It seems like it would be interesting material to most of the people there, and there's a lot of people who are even not Brancopan builders, but camera builders in general, who might have some insight, beyond what I can offer. And I think it's probably like, if you're building a Brancopan, you're probably, if you find the podcast super dry and don't want to listen, that's fine. The Facebook group is also a cool place that has a lot of people talking. So Nico and everybody out there, let me know what you think about just using the Homemade Camera Podcast Facebook group as a place to talk about this. If you think it's like a really bad idea, or it's bothering you, maybe I'll create another group when I get off today. But yeah, I think that's where we should start until it gets out of hand. And if in a week everybody is just talking about their assembly issues with the Brancopan on the Homemade Camera Facebook group, maybe I'll split it off. But for now, let's just roll it in there. It's the Homemade Camera Podcast on Facebook. Okay. Lori Brooks says, you could also put a coat of Liquitex paint on something you want to light seal. I've used it to inner coat color parts. I posted a couple of shots on negative positive last night. Very happy with the neg and spacing of the frames was excellent. Okay, so there's a couple of pieces in there. Frame spacing is actually like pretty wide. I made it such that it would be really easy to cut and not cut the end of a frame. It wastes a little bit of film. There's a trade-off there. I hope you guys dig it. It seems like Lori does, but I dig it. Yeah, you might be able to get one more frame on a roll if I space them really close. As for Liquitex paint, I don't know the brand Liquitex. Maybe that's an English or a California thing. I have a couple of paint preferences for camera building, although I don't use any paint in the Brancopan. My first preference is a Plasti Dip, matte black spray Plasti Dip. And this is like basically a spray rubber. It is not a strong coating. You can scratch it off. You don't want to use it on exterior parts. But things like if you were having issues with reflection in here, which I don't think you should because I haven't, but who knows. Particularly on the OG 4x5, a lot of people will like to spray the inner part of what would be the mirror box on an SLR, but I don't know what you call it on a camera like this, the light path sides, whatever. The inner part here is nice to spray in Plasti-Dip. I would never use Plasti-Dip on something like this chamber or anything where there's motion, right? Friction between two objects. It rubs off really easily. And what's more is when it rubs off, you get these little like rubber like boogers that will gum up mechanisms. So Plasti-Dip, great for light proofing because it will sort of seep and coat through layers and things like that. And it's a light type black paint. It's also flexible, so it's good on things like bellows and stuff like that, although that's not applicable to this camera. But it is not for any surface where it's going to have friction, like two pieces moving together or the film moving across, certainly not, or even just your hands. I also really like black epoxy nail polish. I think it's a really hard and strong paint. Again, I don't use it on the Brancopan per se, but if I were to print things and I needed something that could stand up to abuse, I know it does stick to PLA pretty well. Okay, Liquitex is opaque latex acrylic paint. I've used it to repair minor pinhole leaks in the folder camera. Mars Black is opaque. Yeah, okay, I'm going to have to check out Liquitex. I also use spray primer from Rust-Oleum, like car body paints. If you want to get like a really crazily nice finish or something that looks incredibly professional, you can print yourself an extra shell layer on your camera, any camera for this camera, and then, you know, sand down the ladder of grit. So start at like 100 grit, then move to 200 grit, then 300 grit, and then eventually like 800 grit. Once it's really smooth, right? Maybe even like wet sanding, although moisture sand, don't use a ton of water. You'll make the grain expand. And then you can spray prime and then treat it just like an auto body. I don't know if any of you guys work on Corvettes. I do not, but occasionally I do some fiberglass work and auto body work. And, you know, you can get this plastic incredibly smooth and then prime it and sand it and prime it and sand it and paint it and sand it and paint it again and put a gloss coat on it and basically get the same finish as a car. I think that is too much work, and I like to be Bauhaus about showing the materials that I'm using, but you might not, and so I'd love to see somebody's painted camera. It's going to take you a lot of time, and you know, this is general spray painting tips, but lots of thin coats and sanding in between will give you a nice mirror finish in spray paint. Let's go back. We've got a bunch of questions or comments. JPad, how do we show our finished cameras? So I would say post them in the Homemade Camera Podcast Facebook page, or spam other Facebook pages so they can see and people will find out about it. If you tag me in a story on Facebook, I will almost always reshare it. And then at least anybody who is following Cameradactyl, it's a few thousand people, will then see it if they click on my stories. I'll probably make a highlighted story of all of the different builds, so that'll, you know, be a more permanent thing, maybe post some things. But the Homemade Camera Podcast on Facebook or any other Facebook groups you're on is like really excellent advertising for me that I really appreciate, and people are interested in it. I think there's a film photographers group, a 35mm film photographers group, a medium format film photographers group. There's a lot of groups I don't know about yet. But yeah, so Homemade Camera Podcast on Facebook or Instagram is a good way to send it to me. Or if you're a little bit more old school, you can certainly send me an email. And if you send me an email with photos in it, let me know if it's okay for me to share them. I would love to share some on the Instagram when I'm back to using that more regularly. Thompson Young Guy, I hope I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. Could you please add English subtitles in the assembly video and slicing instructions? I'm not good at listening to English so much. Okay, that's a really reasonable request. I listen to computer programming and camera repair and mechanical engineering videos in about 4 or 5 languages, and I speak only 2 of them. It is difficult, and sometimes you just have to watch. I may, if there's an auto-generated version, do it. I'm not going to go through and type subtitles for everything. Let me see after this. I will see if I can enable it. If there's something in particular, Thosafon, hope I'm saying that right, that's really getting you, send me an email. I will, I might not spend 4 or 5 hours subtitling the thing, but I'll spend 20 minutes figuring out what it is that I haven't explained clearly in the video. Lori Brooks says, I'm always willing to help out with questions on it. Let's make it a community thing. Thank you, Lori. I appreciate it. Lori's going to put me out of business one of these days, and it's going to be great. Let's see. Derek Konigsberg says, I've been taking my time printing using a 0.15 millimeter layer height and dissolvable PVA support. So that's great. I think you're going to get a much cleaner print than I ever did with dissolving supports. Most of my parts are printed now and the quality looks pretty good, but haven't yet started assembly. Derek, what printer are you using with a dual extruder? I'm curious about this. I have never used PVA supports on my home printers, but it's something that I've been curious about doing, and maybe even modding some of my printers to have a dual extruder for that purpose. Certain Exposures says you can buy cheap mesh gloves that prevent cuts. They're used by artists to shave wood. For sure. So I mailed almost 300, what do you say, film counter dials and stickers and laser cut acrylic focusing screens yesterday. My hands are completely cut up from paper cuts. But way worse is like this is, I stabbed myself in the hand prying parts out. I really like using a big knife with a pointy tip that's got like a fat enough blade that I can use it as a pry bar to get supports out. For sure, like some, Certain Exposures may be talking about some sort of modern chainmail, not for cosplay, but I think about like oyster shucking gloves and Kevlar gloves. Those were really useful when I lived in New Orleans for not stabbing myself in the hand. I think safety first, or at least second. Yeah, that's a good point. Certain Exposures, if you've got like a link to an Amazon thing for chainmail artist gloves, leave it in the comments. That would be cool to see. Jared Konigsberg's got to run. Lori Brooks says, an Instagram hashtag for Brancopan needed. Let's do, yeah. Oh, A-Bear says hashtag Brancopan. Perfect. That's that. Yes, we'll do hashtag Brancopan. Sure. Yeah, and if you hashtag Brancopan, I may reach out to you and say, hey, can I, if you don't put it in an Instagram stories, I will ask before reposting your stuff on my page. But I would appreciate it. I always add a new link. Okay, do we have any more questions, or are we're all ready to print some cameras and shoot some cool film photos? I think that's it. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to cut this off, and I'll come back and do just, another one in a couple of weeks. And those will just be on assembly stuff or anything else we get to. If there's not too many people, I don't think there will be. John Benedetto, most less than $10. John, what are you talking about? Gloves? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to call this one. If you have any specific questions that you're having trouble with, you can send me an Instagram direct message on @cameradactyl or an email at ethan@cameradactyl.com. Ooh, this is an issue. Not a printing question, but the 50 millimeter lens set in infinity touches and pushes the body. Interesting. Have not mounted a 50 on this camera. It is the same mount as the homunculus, which has not had any problems on any of the 50s that I know it's being used with, or NIC files. Let's see. Bear, have you tried focusing it at infinity? If it does, that cam sticks out a lot longer than all the other lenses that I've used it with. I've used it with a 65, a 75, a 90, and a 100. And those all should be fine. One thing you can do for now is scrape that down. If that's actually mistoleranced for that particular lens, I will release another file where there's like a little inset. I'll need a couple caliper measurements from you of your lens, but yeah, I don't want to make it so that you can't use the 50 on there for sure. Thosafon, I hope I'm saying that right, said, I got a 65 millimeter with stiff focusing from eBay. Should I take it back? Is that normal? It is normal that your focusing will get stiff as the grease in the helix dries. It is not a problem, right? It's like, but it should not work like that. It's like you need to change the oil in your car and you need to change the oil in your lens, probably every 20 or 30 years, but these lenses are, pretty old now. If you feel comfortable, you could disassemble the helix pretty easily with only a few screws. You take it out, clean the grease off with some rubbing alcohol, and then I would use white lithium bearing grease on that helix and then reassemble it. Make sure that you have it go together exactly the same way it comes out. So before you remove the helix from its shell, I would use like a magic marker or a piece of tape or something and just make an alignment mark or even a scratch if you don't care with a sharp screwdriver, so that you know that 12 o'clock on the male part of the helix and 12 o'clock on the female part of the helix start at the same point, rather than rotating this one like this and putting it backwards. So you can never achieve infinity focus. But that is a very easy thing to fix. It's not any broken part of the lens. It's just, the lens could be broken, but it's nine times out of 10 or 99 out of 100 at least. Stiff focusing is just dried grease. It just needs to be cleaned and replaced. Bear says, is it okay to trim the body? Yes. So this is the reason why I'm printing the body with 6 shell layers, top, bottom, and sides. That should give you, depending upon your layer thickness, a couple of millimeters of solid plastic, which you do not need for light tightness. I made it like that so that 1, it's very strong. 2, it's definitely light tight. And 3, when you are doing the trimming on the focus mount for infinity focus, that you don't cut through and cut into the support material, which is not solid and not light tight. So yes, you can trim the body. I don't know how much. So I assume you're now talking about trimming. Let's see. So I think there's this lip right here that's probably interacting with the rear of your 50 millimeter lens. It seems unlikely that should happen to me, but again, I don't have one, and so I don't, I'm not calling you a liar for sure. So you can trim this back quite a bit. If you want to trim it more than like a millimeter or 2, you can either add more bottom surface layers, right? This counts as a bottom surface layer because it's printed against support, or just trim it way the hell back and then, seal it by pouring Plasti Dip or rubber or even a bit of glue in there, or some foam. Yeah, that should not get in the way. But if it does, hack it off for now and let me know. I will ask you some questions. I hope you have a $12 digital caliper from Amazon or better, and I'll release a second version of this that'll take all of the lenses. I'm sorry about that if that is actually getting in the way. Gilligan Pablo says, you're right, Ethan, 50 works fine on the homunculus. Yeah, and so this should be the exact same mount as the homunculus. And so if this doesn't hit on the homunculus, which, I've sold, I don't know, 150, 200 of them by now, and I haven't received any complaints. And I know Nick Lyle is like the guy I designed it for, the Homemade Camera podcast, and he primarily uses it with a 50 with no problems. But what I wonder is maybe, so on the back of the lens, as you focus, there's this cam, maybe the 50 goes all the way around, and it's just hanging up kind of on the sides. So, there's a lip that comes down like this as a light baffle. Maybe it's not actually hitting the light baffle itself, but it's just sliding inside the light baffle and just catching an edge, in which case I would feel fine opening that baffle up by sort of scraping with the edge of a chisel or just sanding. If you really need to take it down and it's, the cam goes like millimeters behind where that thing is, we'll figure it out. Give it a shot, send me an email. We can FaceTime privately, and I will take some measurements, and if need be, I will make a mod of the camera that should take all the lenses. Okay, certain exposure says type mesh gloves in Amazon. You'll see mesh kitchen gloves. They should stop stray cuts. Oh, my hands thank you already. I'm going to buy 10 pairs of these. Nico Cazal says, if you have $100 or $200 more to spend on an Ender 3, what would you get as a printer? So what would I get as a printer, or what should you get as a printer? So I think I have a lot of friends who are sort of tangentially interested in 3D printing, and they say, Ethan, what printer should I buy? If they're not, I usually ask them, what are you trying to print? If they don't know and they're just interested in 3D printing in general, I say buy the cheapest printer you can, like an $80, $90 printer, and just use it to play around with, make some sketches, or three-dimensional sketches, figure out what it is that you want to make, and then buy a printer that does those things well, right? So I'm not at all interested in Star Wars, but I am interested in the maker community, and so a lot of the people that I love really love Star Wars. I've got a friend who prints the innards for his homemade lightsabers, and so they're all sort of circular tubular mounts for electronics, and he finds that a Delta printer, which uses Cartesian geometry to make circles really, really well, is perfect if you're always making circles. I, on the other hand, can't fit a damn camera body on those printers. Drives me crazy. And so I would say if you don't really know what you want in a 3D printer, start out buying the cheapest printer possible, which is probably an ANET for $90. If you want to print a Brancopan, spending $175 on an Ender 3 will definitely pay itself off immediately trying to print this thing. But I wouldn't say go out and buy a Prusa. I have one. They're about $1,000. They're super nice, but you may not need it for what you want to print. And also maybe even cheaper, or for a little bit more money, you might find something that will print what you want to print better. I should also note, I treat 3D printers almost as disposable office equipment. Not that they're disposable, but when I need one, I just buy one. And so I think spending as little money as you can on the first one before you figure out what you're going to buy is probably a good method if you're just going to go buy another one as soon as you need another one. If you're making more of an investment, maybe like a CR10 is also a Creality machine that's based on the Ender. It has very similar electronics and controls. They have 2 Z-axis motors, which is a little bit nicer for keeping the Z-axis level, but also for moving a bigger Z-axis. They make CR10s, I believe, from 300 millimeters cubed all the way up to, I have a 500 millimeter cubed CR10, which is huge. It is not what I would recommend. It's like I don't even have a place in my shop to permanently set it up, and I'm always moving it around because it's like 3-foot cubed machine. Thosafun says Ender 5 maybe. Yeah, I think I would probably go to a CR10 before an Ender 5, but all of them are fine. I would spend my time thinking more about getting good at drafting than worrying about printers at the moment. I've been playing around with a resin printer of late, which is fun, but totally different to what we should be talking about today. Anyway, yeah, I would get maybe a small CR10. Those are good production printers. But Nico, if you haven't printed anything and your first 3D printing project is going to be a Brancopan, buy an Ender 3. You'll probably either get really into 3D printing and in a year own a few $1,000s worth of 3D printers taking up your entire house, or you won't get really into it and the Ender 3 will be perfectly enough to build the Brancopan. Certain exposure is meant to ask. You showed a Prazia distance finder, range finder, or something measuring for feet. What's your review on that? Any other more modern recommendations besides a tape measure? Yeah, so actually, like on the OG, often I will use a string. This was a customer of mine showed me a picture on Instagram, and I thought, like, this is really clever. I started doing it. The old Minox spy cameras had like a wrist strap chain, and they had little balls on the chain at distance markers. So if you were like copying some documents as a spy or whatever, you put the ball at the paper, right? Stretch the chain out, and now you're 12 inches away. You set the focus to 12 inches, and copy your nuclear secrets or whatever. And so a customer of mine came up with basically the same idea for portraiture. He had a long rope with some knots in it, and on the focusing scale, he had some markings like 6 feet or 10 feet. You throw somebody the line and say, hold the 6-foot line at your eye. You'd stretch the line back and drop it. And that's actually like the most precise way to focus. You'll see like in Hollywood, often like on big film cameras, they will actually use a tape measure and focus that way. That is not generally the most practical. So I do that with the homunculus sometimes, rarely. I'll do it with the 4x5 when I'm shooting, slower and a nice portrait. It doesn't matter. I have a cooperative subject. They'll hold the thing by their eye. The Brancopan, I don't see that making much sense. It's a much quicker camera to use. I'm using it for like street photos or landscapes or whatever while I'm moving around. I'm not setting anything up. So the tape measure and the string method don't really work for me, although they may for you. Back to the Prazia rangefinder. I think they're okay. Bowens makes a good one. Prazia makes a good one. What I would say is that they're pretty simple to take apart. I destroyed one the first time I went to take it apart, but by destroying it, I figured out how it actually came apart, and then bought another one that was miscalibrated for $9 on eBay with shipping, and in 10 minutes I had calibrated it. Almost all of them will need calibration by now because they have a little like finicky mechanics inside. It's very clever. But again, these things were made 30, 40 years ago at least. At the very least, you'll want to clean the mirrors. I would say the interesting thing about those accessory rangefinders is they're extraordinarily simple inside. A lot of them just have like, so you have a window that you look through here and an eyepiece here, and then there's a 45-degree mirror in the middle, and then there's a mirror here that's at 45 degrees that looks out the secondary window. And instead of having like cams and gears to move this guy, often it's just on a spring. And so you'll turn a knob, and that'll push a screw, which will bend the spring that changes the secondary focusing mirror. Anyway, because they're often out of alignment or dirty when you buy them, even if you buy one that's in alignment, I would say just buy the cheapest one you can find that's marked as out of alignment, because you're going to have to do it anyway. And I expect to spend like 25 minutes unscrewing some screws with a small screwdriver, cleaning all of the glass surfaces with alcohol and a Q-tip, and you know, resetting the focus calibration should be very easy for you to do at this point. Yeah, so I've actually walked a customer through doing that on FaceTime once, which was a fun time. But yeah, I think they're good and useful. To be honest, I use one on the homunculus quite a bit because I'm shooting at like f3.5 or f4 for portraits on medium format. That's pretty narrow depth of field. The way I use the Brancopan is almost always hyperfocal distance. So I'll carry one in my bag, and like, you know, I carried this thing through Spain for almost a month, and I not once used it. I just kept it in my bag the whole time, just because like with the 65mm lens, from 5 feet to an infinity is in focus. And yeah, I did not need to focus. It's really fast. But I think they're useful tools. I use them plenty on a homunculus. They're useful for a lot of different cameras. They work great. They're easy to repair. And they're pretty cheap. But yeah, I don't think you need one. Okay, what else? Tape measure is also good for getting flash exposures correct. Danny Atkinson, yep. Or with the string tape marks with f-stop mark. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I've never used that for flash, but yep. Okay, is there anything else, or should we call this one a day? I'm willing to keep going if you guys are, but also go print some cameras and come back to me in a week. Okay, that's probably it. I don't see any more messages, so I'm going to say, hey, thanks everybody for coming. Good luck with your builds. Again, if you have any questions, at Camerdactyl on Instagram or ethan@camerdactyl.com. Send me a message. I will try and get back to you. I'll probably wait, you know, a couple of days and then get back to everybody at once. But yeah, I'm pretty good at not losing emails. Good luck. Send me your pictures. Can't wait to see it. You guys have a nice day.